Welcome to PetrolRevolt. Today we're with Motorcycle Action Group.
But it's time to get serious about the science, the politics and the freedoms. It's about freeing the spirit and not letting it be incarcerated by, in my view, desperately misguided authoritarian edicts from politicians who we pay to work for us. And that's what Motorcycle Action Group's about. It's balmy when we pay the tax on roads that politicians locally and nationally think they can create low traffic neighbourhoods and push us off those roads. It's insane to think that by creating pedestrianised areas everywhere, we're helping the elderly and infirm, like I mentioned before. It's scientifically febrile to say we have to get rid of petrol motorcycles, and actually I would say cars, without a proper scientific basis. Don't tell me about consensus on climate change. Show me the data. Show me the data. And if there is an effect that we're making on climate change, show me why getting rid of petrol cars and petrol motorbikes is actually going to help if we move to electric vehicles when we haven't even got the electrical infrastructure. And guess where that electricity comes from? It comes from fossil fuels anyway. And then we throw all of this away and we make electric cars, which can be up to 6 times more hungry in terms of CO2 emissions than the things that we're scrapping. So when it comes down to it, I think that Motorcycle Action Group is working with all those other people. It's the last line of defence against this madness that can't even work. And what we're really doing is we're handing the keys to our economy to other parts of the world who are smart enough to sell us back what we aren't brave enough to make for ourselves, while we hobble the general public in terms of their ability to get around. Because I'll tell you, millions of people can't afford electric vehicles and have no means of charging them at home unless you've got a cable that goes 30 floors down from your tower block into the street. With my little RS100 at the drop bars,
yes,
I tuned it up. I managed to get up to 15 horsepower out of it and I shot the small end bearing in the process. This is what it was like. I used to have my my bag a bit like that one, BA bag over my shoulder, and it would make my arm go numb. And I used to get nearly home, but if I got stuck in traffic lights, the arm would go numb. I remember one time I tried to signal and my arm was just floating out. I had to get it back up like that. But this is just great. Ah, the smell of it as well. That's probably the smell of the whole place. 100 miles, your arms are all tired and everything's leaning.
Actually, that seat doesn't feel quite so bad as you think. In appearance and the dimensions as well. I remember they mapped it on the adverts, the ergonomics of this compared to a real race bike, and it was just exactly the same profile. can really appreciate the work that's gone into that. Just amazing.
It's so tight.
It sounds just exactly as it should. And it sounds a lot better than the standard bike. You know, your modifications with the pipes and all the rest of it, just exactly right.
The Audi 250 DXi Roundton sounded like that. Well, half the sound of it really. But it reminds me of two things. The smell reminds me of when I used to be a marshal at Kilkirkiston race
You were a
course.
marshal there.
Yeah, did you do that as well?
No, well, I used to go down to Kirkiston all the time.
I seem to remember you.
Well, my girlfriend at the time actually lived only about half a mile up the road from Kirkiston. So every time there was racing on, I would pop down and see her.
I used to be a marshal there, and it was just great. I'd have to stand there. They gave me the terrible job. I was 15 and 16. I had to stand there with a flag to get them to go back in. These things would come up at me at 100 miles per hour. You just think, they're not going to go, they're going to hit me. And they always went in, of course, but the whole place always used to have that blue smoke. And the sound of it also, so the smell reminds me of Kirkiston, the sound reminds me of me what I used to do to pick up my girlfriend because I wouldn't get off the bike. You just do that and she just knew she'd come out. It's Pavlovian, you know. Because I'd go out because I couldn't be bothered to take all the gear off, especially in the winter. Go ring, 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 and then she'd come out, she'd trot out and then get on the back. Ah, dear, those are the days.
Yeah.
40 years ago.
Don't remind me.
60 for you. The problem with it in summer as well, there's so much heat coming off it, it'd burn your legs. That's, even if you had shorts on, it would just burn them.
What were you doing out in shorts on a big like?
Oh, come on.
Haven't you heard of health and safety?
Okay, this interview is over.
So guys, tell us how you've both arrived at being in the position that you have at Motorcycle Action Group.
Well, we all know that one of the reasons, the primary motivation for forming Motorcycle Action Group was the 1973 imposition of the helmet law, and everything's kind of grown from there because there's just so much anti-motorcycle legislation out there, and it's becoming unfortunately more and more difficult to repel that. But from my own experience, I could remember when I was a teenager seeing guys riding around without helmets, and I thought that's a really nice free way to move. And when they introduced the helmet law, well, I figured that I'd just wear a helmet anyway because that was something that I needed to comply with as a youngster. But when I got my first motorcycle, it was a 250cc motorcycle, and it was only a few short years after that motorcycles were then restricted to 125 capacity. And I thought, well, I haven't had any problems in terms of falling off the bike or anything, so it seemed a wasted piece of legislation to have 125 restrictions. And of course, when we look at what's going on today, it's become harder and harder and harder over the years to be able to get a motorcycle license. And it's as if the authorities are trying to wither away the base of motorcyclists, the people who want a license, and reduce it so that it's only old folk that are driving motorcycles these days. So it's kind of interesting that it used to be that it was all youngsters when I was riding my first motorcycles, and typically everyone would be under 25 years old, and you didn't see that many older motorcyclists. These days, the average age for a motorcyclist is something like about 53, 54 years old, and we're sitting here probably reflecting that. But we'd obviously like to see the grassroots where individuals are able to start taking a motorcycle license again. It's a convenience. It's a great thing that's a lot more fun to ride a motorcycle than it is a car. It's a lot more challenging to ride a motorcycle in general than a car, and that's one of the reasons that I work so heavily with Motorcycle Action Group, and I also work with the Federation of European Motorcyclists, of which MAG is a member, and that particular organisation looks after motorcyclists across Europe. So that's a little bit about my own motivation.
I started in 1980. I was in the back of my sister's boyfriend's 100cc Kawasaki. I was scared as hell. He must have done over 40 miles per hour, but that seemed fast to me at the time. A couple of years later, when I got to 17, I rebuilt my first motorbike. It was a Yamaha 100. So across a couple of months, I learned everything about the internal combustion engine because I only had 65 quid to buy it. I've had bikes continuously ever since, right up to a Kawasaki 1300. And it's that liberation that really is different to having four wheels. And for me, biking is a lifestyle choice as well as just an economical way to get around. I first got involved with the Motorcycle Action Group as a Member of Parliament when I was lucky enough to become chair of the all-party motorcycle group. And there are quite a lot of bikers in Parliament, so we had a good experience. That was back in roughly 1998, 99. Then when I finished being an MP, I applied to work full-time for MAG, and that's when I became Director of Communications and Public Affairs. Why do I do it? Because our lifestyle's under threat. And what's happening to bikers is actually happening to society as a whole. The state thinks it knows better than we do what our personal decisions should be. And as an intense libertarian, I can't accept that. When you have an allegedly free society, you need to give people the right to make decisions like that. Then there's another irony. Bikes are a great way to get around if you're not that wealthy or if you're quite young. They're congestion busting for everybody. The more bikes there are, the less traffic there is for everybody, including car drivers. And then thirdly, there are environmental considerations. You just use fuel less, it's better fuel footprint. That's not the main thing for me. The fundamental, though, is that biking is a statement of freedom of choice. And I think we're literally in the fight of our lives now with politics and with government. And I say that as a former MP. So for me, this is an ideological commitment to give people the right to choose. And it's, for me at least, defined as the right to choose two great wheels.
There's a lot to be said for the practicality of a motorcycle. And again, when I'm traveling on my motorcycle, we're all subject to traffic jams these days on the motorways and on other roads. And the great thing about a bike is that when you take it on a ride and you've got a destination to get to, you know you're actually going to get there on time. And for me, that's one of the strongest benefits. So I like to use my motorcycle, particularly during busy periods, because then I can filter through traffic. And of course, there's well-documented evidence to show that motorcycles do actually ease congestion. And if 10% of the car drivers would choose to ride a motorcycle instead of a motor car, then we would be able to get rid of something like about 60% of the congestion that we have on the roads in Britain today. So I think that speaks for itself. It's the inevitable geometry argument. So a motorcycle isn't anywhere near the width of a car. It takes up less space when you get there to your destination. You can find parking easier, and it's more economic, as Lembit has said. And as far as I'm concerned, it's just more fun. And I never get bored, even in driving through urban traffic. It's still so much more preferable to be on a bike than in a car.
Well, that's why we are here, I suppose. A labour of love for a lifetime. But you've got all this machinery. You've got the machines I wanted to have when I was in my teens. How did you get into this?
Yeah, well, that's because I never have come out of my teens. I've been riding since I was 16. So even when I was 15, I was eyeing up what moped was going to be in my garage. And for me, that was freedom. As soon as I turned 16 and got that motorbike, I could ride out into the countryside.
But you covered about 20,000 miles a year on your moped. Because when you get your first bike, you just go everywhere on it you possibly can. Every spare moment is used riding your motorcycle and keeping it on the road as well. And the great thing about being so young and not having a lot of money, but having a bike that you really love, is that you learn a lot about looking after it yourself. And I can tell from the conversation that we had earlier today that you've developed that experience. Your objective of building these bikes has really worked extremely well, because they're not just standard bikes, they're modified bikes. And again, to be able to build it to that sort of standard only comes through experience and knowledge that you've developed over years.
Yeah, well, I had to, when I was 16, and the motorcycle was multi-purpose. It was your means of transport to college or uni, wherever you went on it. Then it was social, so you meet up with your mates and go out for a ride. It just served many purposes. And then when it broke, you had to fix it yourself because you didn't have any money to pay someone to fix it. So you had to learn how to fix it. If you couldn't fix the motorbike yourself, you're in
Well, if you're
a lot of
anything like
trouble.
me, I used to go out to the garage just to start taking things apart to see what was underneath all the externals of the motorcycle. So unfortunately, I didn't know what a gasket was at the time, and I'd put it back on, and then the thing would leak. But I can totally relate to having to make the choices. I couldn't afford to run a car. I couldn't afford to buy a car, so I bought a motorcycle. And I can remember as a young man, I used to go to all the clubs and discotheques as they were known. And I'd travel there during the winter months on my motorcycle. And I can remember sort of going out with all the gear to keep warm as much as I could. I'd go in, I'd have an evening of dancing and drinking, and not alcoholic, I better say. And when I was coming home, it was just so cold and bitter because I was all so hot from being at the club, and it was just accepted that riding a bike had its inconveniences. But for me, the benefits were just so strong; it didn't really bother me. I was quite happy to do that.
The point you make about having to do it yourself, I've just remembered something I haven't thought about for decades. The gasket that I broke when I rebuilt my Yamaha RS100, little 100cc two-stroke. I decided to be clever and make my own gasket out of a Frosty's packet. I got the shape exactly right. I can tell you, to cut long story short, Frosty's packets don't make great gaskets for a number of different reasons. I did run it for about 3 miles and then I had to do it all again. They didn't seize, but there was just a trail.
It's that whole journey of trial and error and experience. I remember this would have been on a Fizzy, engine mounts broke. So I looked at what an engine mount was. Okay, it was just a bit of threaded bar.
Steel, yeah.
Okay, I'm going to make my own. So I got a bit of steel, wound the die down, create your own thread.
Yeah.
It goes through, put 2 nuts on the end, take it out for a spin, open up the throttle, and it shoots the engine mount that I'd made off either side. And then you learn about tensile strength.
Yeah, that's right.
Because the bar that I got and threaded was just nowhere near tensile strength enough to cope with the forces of an engine. You're learning about gasket material, learning about materials, everything. The whole journey that motorcycling ownership takes you on is just invaluable.
I can tell you for a fact, though, that you can make a completely successful Woodruff key out of a 2p piece. There's probably that Yamaha YB100 out there somewhere that still has that 2p piece after the original one broke. And it's interesting you should say this, because I don't think we give people the opportunity to understand how the world works anymore. It's all electronics, which isn't a bad thing. You get great engines like that. But back then, you understood the laws of physics or the mechanics of it all because you had your toolkit and you could fix it on the roadside, and the bikes weren't as reliable as now. And the skills I learned then definitely mean that I do my own DIY at home, probably my own gardening, that kind of thing. And it means you're in touch with the world around you instead of having to call the RAC every time there's a problem with your machine.
Yeah, well, a lot of these take an awful lot of fixing, but for me that's half the pleasure. Half riding, half fixing, and I enjoy fixing and stripping as much as I enjoy riding.
Well, I would call it fettling, and part of it is just the pleasure of actually working with the machine. You don't necessarily have to do it sometimes, but it's fun to see what else you can look at, and even if you're just stripping it apart to clean it, it's all part of the experience of ownership. And I kind of look at most car drivers, and they live in a very isolated world. They're sat in their cabin, and they don't generally have a look underneath the car. They don't generally have a look at the engine. But as a motorcyclist, it's very much a part of your own, like an extension of your own body. And you want to make sure that everything is working just as well as it can. So whether that's working with the suspension and adjusting it and trying it out, or whether it's working with what would have been the timing, the points, and trying to tune it up to get the maximum speed from it. it's just part of the experience, and it's something that I enjoyed as much as riding the bike. And of course, when you got to speak with your friends, they'd all be doing the same thing. They would work on their own motorcycles. And even better, if you happened to break down on the roadside, someone would come along on another motorcycle and they would stop and they would say, "Can I help you, son?" And you'd go, "Yeah, this is really fantastic, because people are actually willing to stop and help me. But if I was driving a car, no one would be bothered." So that's just one of the nice things about motorcyclists. They're a friendly bunch.
You started up the RG500 there, that grade 2-stroke, and it brought two things back to me. The sound of the 70s, that's obviously an 80s bike, but the sound when I was first riding and the smell of the 2-stroke, I just loved it. I love the smell of 2-stroke in the morning. But
like you, Lembit, you know, we were both raised in Northern Ireland, and the road racing out there was the thing in the summer. And I can remember every weekend there were different races on that you could go and see, and you'd find yourself standing behind a hedge and watching these bikes zoom past at 90 or 100 or maybe 120 miles an hour. And they were navigating these roads with very little protection. It wasn't like the race circuits that we have in the rest of the UK and England, where you've got runoff areas and you've got safety as a paramount prerequisite of holding racing. When we were youngsters, it was just riding these roads as fast as you could. And of course, the thing was, when the racing had finished, you could actually take your own motorcycle along these roads, and if you didn't have any police there, well, you could just go as hard as you thought the racers were riding, and that was great fun. But that's the difference between then and now.
The difference, yeah, you're right. Health and safety has got a place, but too much health and safety infantilizes people. Back then, and perhaps even now with the road races, if you get it wrong, you end up in the chip shop or ramming your bike through the pub, you know, because everything's so proximate.
These days at the TT, they're putting speed restrictions in for the speed for the duration of the TT, and it used to be, again, I'm speaking maybe 20 years ago, it was the standard no speed limit outside of the towns. So if you wanted to do circuits of the race circuit, you could do that. And you could just go as fast as your motorcycle would take you. As long as you weren't riding dangerously, the police were quite happy to allow you to go as fast as you wanted. But of course, these days, health and safety, as you say, Lembit, the roads are now sort of ratcheted down in terms of the speed limits, and it's only when all the bikers leave and go home that they put the standard no speed limit back in place.
You've talked about in your discussion about licence restrictions in terms of size, and you've seen that change in your motorcycling history, and you've talked about a lot of freedoms and choices that are being taken away from us. So this leads you into what you do for Motorcycle Action Group. So what are the top campaigns that you're looking at the moment?
The single most important thing is a threat to the whole thing. The government's talking about banning these engines, not just 2-strokes, but all piston engines for cars as it happens in 2030, and everything, all private transport by 2035. They've got this environmental agenda. We can talk about the technicals of it. I don't believe that does any good. But fundamentally, the government thinks it knows better than we do about what's right for our future. And I think at a practical level it can't work. You simply haven't got the infrastructure to go all electric. That's what they want us to do. And at an even more practical level, motorcycling doesn't work if you've got to have electric. I've got an electric bicycle and I love using that for 2 or 3 miles, especially in the summer. And I can see the benefit of having low-powered electric commuting bikes as well. They're pretty cheap, maybe if you're doing 10 miles a day. But if you want to go 200 miles, if you want to go from here to Rome, you're not going to do it with an electric engine, because it's practically impossible to do the charging, and the range anxiety is a problem as well. So from a MAG point of view, the single most important thing is defending people's right to use the internal combustion engine. I know we're not really here to talk about the environmental debate, but they come close together. And I challenged the Greens to explain why they even think it's good for the environment to ban petrol and diesel vehicles and petrol motorbikes. Because if even a proportion of people went from petrol cars to petrol motorbikes, you would make far bigger saving in the emissions they're talking about than by banning these things. So that's a really huge one. Other things that we're talking about, we've got license restrictions. They've got so much more strict now since I got my license. I know you've got a pilot's license, and when I was rich, I used to fly it quite a lot. It's easier to get a pilot's license, and the point that you yourself have made, Michael, it's easier to get a pilot's license than to get an unrestricted motorcycle license. Where's the logic in that? To ride around in 2 dimensions is harder than to fly around in 3. It's bonkers. It's just ignorant rubbish. And then there are third things which are happening. Low traffic neighbourhoods, taking our road space away from us. What's all that about? So that we have active travel. So we cycle and we walk. You can't run a modern economy by walking and cycling. There's a clue in what China's doing in motorising its transport. It's because while cycling has a role, if you want to be in a top flight economy, you have to get around. And you do that with an engine. Also, incidentally, the elderly, the disabled, they're not really going to love not being able to drive and ride around. So MAG's now working, the Motorcycle Action Group is working with other like-minded groups to say, it's time that the politicians recognise they work for us, not the other way around. It actually means that I spend far more time campaigning about motorbikes than actually riding them. But that's what MAG is doing. It's a real conflict situation now. And if government sees sense, then Operation Earthquake, which we call it, means that they will, as individuals, get re-elected. But we've served notice. Those election candidates who think they can take our rights away, take our right to ride petrol bikes away, and actually cars as well, they're not going to get our vote. And we hope we can make a pretty big shift in the whole political spectrum as a result. Am I passionate about it? Yeah. This is a vocation. It's not just a job. It's much bigger than that. And so I rant a bit about it because it's hard for me to believe that politicians can make such ignorant decisions without listening to the experts.
Well, just touching on what you're saying there, Lembit, you know, a lot of my riding involves touring, and I enjoy using it to commute. I enjoy using it to go and visit friends, or enjoy using it for leisure, but I also use it sometimes to go on holiday. And the problem is, for me, with the electric bikes, at the moment, it's not untypical that if you have a range of 90, maybe 100 miles, that's considered pretty much state of the art. But the problem is, if you go and you have to charge it up for an hour and a half, perhaps, and you've got to first of all find somewhere that you can charge it up. Secondly, you've got to stand there waiting to charge it up. And if you're trying to tour up with a passenger and all your luggage, and you want to cover distance seriously across Europe, you're not able to do that. And for me, it's simply about having a choice. MAG isn't against electric motorcycles. It doesn't happen to suit me, but there's no problem if someone finds that it's a useful type of motorcycle that they want and they can enjoy, then great. But for me, and for most other touring motorcyclists, it's just a non-starter, because the problem is that we're being banned. It's not something that is there as an option. It's something that we're being forced to live with. And of course, the government's argument might be, well, you can still ride your old motorcycle. But if car drivers and motorcyclists are being forced into this takeover because we can't buy a brand new internal combustion engine motorcycle, then what's going to happen is the fuel supply that we use is going to become harder and harder to come by. In other words, there will be fewer garages because people are being forced into the situation where they must drive or ride an electrically propelled vehicle. So it's a very unhappy situation. And why the government, if the electric vehicles are so good, then why do we have to legislate that people can't have them anymore, or can't have an internal combustion engine any longer? I'll tell you what, any time I would choose to ride any of these bikes instead of an electric motorcycle. Yes, they make a noise, but it's a wonderful noise. Yes, they use lots of two-stroke oil, and it exits out through the tailpipe. But the reality is that from a point of view of carbon footprint, it's still a fraction of what other forms of transport are using. And I'm including buses, trains, motor cars, lorries, anything else that you can think of. A motorcycle uses so little in terms of its carbon footprint that I can't see what the problem is. So it just seems unfair.
You're obviously really as passionate as we are about bikes. What would happen to your interest in bikes, and what would happen to your practical application if you were told you had to junk these and go electric?
Well, all these are recreational. Yeah, a Sunday morning ride out for a tank of fuel. About 100 miles in this. For touring, I've got a couple of touring bikes. So an adventure bike, which I've got panniers on, which I'd do long distance touring. I'd go to the south of Spain in that. If it wasn't the adventure bike, I've got a classic ZX10, an 80s ZX10, and I'd do some touring in that. If they were all taken away from me because I couldn't buy petrol anymore because it's either not available or you're priced out of the market, and the only option was electric, well, I wouldn't be riding motorbikes because
Well, couldn't you put an electric motor into the frame and the chassis of your ZX10 and pretend it was a ZX10?
Well, you could do, and you'll get some benefits for it, where it would be better than the petrol engine. Some reliability benefits. The ZX10 is on carburetors. If you take it up a mountain, it's going to start to run a bit unhappy. So there'll be some benefits of touring on an electric bike. But just last summer, through various things that we were doing with track days or personal holidays, I went up and down from Dover to the south of Spain about 4 times. Now, the car parks throughout the French motorway network were complete chaos with people queuing.
For charging.
They're queuing for their charging.
Yeah.
So now on your motorcycle, how are you going to get the infrastructure to charge your bike?
Well, there's another problem. You know, if you're driving a car, you can go in and leave your car there, and you can have a cup of coffee or whatever it is for an hour and a half, whatever it takes to boost the charge. But if you're a motorcyclist, one of the things that we've experienced here is the high rate of theft in the UK. And it kind of makes me wonder that if my bike was sitting there for an hour and a half, there's no means of securing it on any of the existing charge points that I've seen across the UK. What are motorcyclists meant to do? Do you just leave your motorcycle exposed and walk away and leave it there, open to the threat of somebody putting it in the back of a transit van? Or do you stand there in the pouring rain, watching your bike charge up for the next hour and a half, and then mount it and drive on? You know, there's no thought as far as motorcyclists are concerned, and I mean, it's far from ideal. But at least with petrol-driven bikes, you can pull into the garage, fill up in 5 minutes, and you're on your way again. So I think that it's going to have an effect both in terms of our ability to get where we want to go, and also the whole economics around having to stand there for an hour and a half while a vehicle charges up. And it's something that people don't seem to talk about very much, but I think it's crucial, and I think that we're damaging our own economy by pushing this, foisting this upon people with no recourse.
Well, I have a passion for these bikes, and whether it was touring, whether it was a recreational ride on a Sunday morning, you know, all those usages of bikes I use motorcycles for. I've got a cruiser. I've got pretty much every genre of bike. I just love bikes. But what you've just said there is the reason that this exists. Yeah, because you asked the question, what would happen? Well, I would not be able to enjoy all of those leisure activities and you know, the life, the learning that you get from it by breaking down and fixing your bike and meeting other people, and the journey of life that you'll get on the motorcycle. So you know, this is all about PetrolRevolt, a tongue-in-cheek joke at the electric car world.
I think it's a good kind of pun, the PetrolRevolt name. It kind of summarizes pretty much what you're doing. I understand that you're wanting to run different events during the summer months so that petrol heads, for want of a better expression, are able to go out and enjoy themselves on track and get some value back from their petrol-driven motorcycles. So that sounds like a good way to spend some quality time.
Well, that's what we're all about. It's a tongue-in-cheek joke at the electric car world, using your petrol engine bike or car to on the track or on a tour. And you feel passionately about things you campaign for with Motorcycle Action Group, because you've seen those restrictions through the years come in, whether it's been crash helmets, licensing laws, and all other things. I'm passionate about the petrol engine because I was a petrol engine design development engineer for the car industry. Cars has always been my living, bikes has always been my hobby and my passion. The internal combustion engine has seen us through over well over 100 years, and it is going to be consigned to history books for no good reason. And what's replacing it is not in a fit state to function in the way that we all need it to use cars and bikes in the way that we use these.
But I still want to be able to buy new motorcycles, because who knows what could be on the horizon there. But of course, a lot of the development of these motorcycles has now been curtailed because the manufacturers can't see any possible way of getting their money back. And if you went to, for example, the NEC show this year, the motorcycle show, the vast majority of stands there were trying to sell new electric motorcycles, and the traditional motorcycles that were on display were pretty much motorcycles that had been frozen in their development, and there wasn't very much in the way of new internal combustion engine motorcycles. And this is another sort of disappointment that we see this happening around us. And for many people, riding a petrol-driven motorcycle, be it two-stroke or four-stroke, that's part of what motorcycling's about. And they've actually tried to crush that. The government and the authorities are trying to remove, extract the fun aspect. There's more to getting from A to B than just your motorcycle being reliable or your car being reliable. It's the experience of driving and how that machine drives is what petrol heads and people who enjoy motorcycling enjoy, that aspect of it.
And that's what Motorcycle Action Group's about. It's about freeing the spirit and not letting it be incarcerated by, in my view, desperately misguided authoritarian edicts from politicians who we pay to work for us. It's balmy when we pay the tax on roads that politicians locally and nationally think they can create low traffic neighbourhoods and push us off those roads. It's insane to think that by creating pedestrianised areas everywhere, we're helping the elderly and the infirm, like I mentioned before. It's scientifically febrile to say we have to get rid of petrol motorcycles, and actually I would say cars, without a proper scientific basis. Don't tell me about consensus on climate change. Show me the data. Show me the data. And if there is an effect that we're making on climate change, show me why getting rid of petrol cars and petrol motorbikes is actually going to help if we move to electric vehicles when we haven't even got the electrical infrastructure. And guess where that electricity comes from? It comes from fossil fuels anyway. And then we throw all of this away and we make electric cars, which can be up to 6 times more hungry in terms of CO2 emissions than the things that we're scrapping. So when it comes down to it, I think that Motorcycle Action Group is working with all those other people. It's the last line of defense against this madness that can't even work. And what we're really doing is that we're handing the keys to our economy to other parts of the world who are smart enough to sell us back what we aren't brave enough to make for ourselves, while we hobble the general public in terms of their ability to get around. Because I'll tell you, millions of people can't afford electric vehicles and have no means of charging them at home unless you've got a cable that goes 30 floors down from your tower block into the street.
The Alliance of British Drivers is an organisation that we work with, and we can see the pain and agony that many of the members of that particular group are going through, because they feel for their cars in the same way that we do about our motorcycles. And so therefore, I think that the more people we can get involved in our campaign to save the internal combustion engine, the only way we can do that is to spread the word. but there are lots of little isolated puddles of groups that really don't want to see this happening. And I think what's gradually occurring is that we're getting those puddles starting to form lakes. And there's a momentum that's building now. And I would urge anyone who's watching this production to actually consider joining. If you're a car driver, join the Alliance of British Drivers. If you're a motorcyclist, join the Motorcycle Action Group, and we will lobby as best we can and as effectively as we can. And we're known as being a strong lobby organisation, and we have the contacts, but we need the support, the ground support, to be able to push these things forward, to get the MPs to understand what's going on. Hence, one of the developments within the organisation is an initiative called Operation Earthquake, and that is seeking to find out from all of the politicians out there who actually supports this ban on internal combustion engine motorcycles and cars. And if they turn around and they say that they're quite happy for that ban to go through, then we don't vote for them, and we recommend all of our supporters not to vote for these MPs, regardless of whatever other policies they have. So we can do this because there are so many marginal seats around the country. Was it 630 constituencies, something like that, across the UK. And we think that we can actually sway this by getting the marginal seats. And if our supporters refuse to vote for the people who are bringing in and happy to see the ban taking place, then we may actually get some MPs wanting to come on board and perhaps being a little bit more vocal in their criticism for the ministerial side of the government, who is quite happy to see this go through. You know, there's a lot of misinformation that's been given to the MPs, and I really feel that it's because a lot of people, including MPs, don't feel qualified to be able to question what is being told to them by the green activists. And this is what is happening, that they have the ear of the politicians, and we've got to try and get the message out there as to why it's still okay to drive a petrol car or a petrol motorcycle. So it's a difficult job.
So we've got a few things going on there. We've got the petrol engine ban, which in terms of motorcycles, they're probably unlikely to be hybrid motorcycles. So you're going to see, with cars, they can be hybrid up to 2030, and then 2035 petrol is gone completely. But bikes, because you're not going to have a hybrid, then they're going to see the end of petrol bikes 2030. You've got your licensing campaigns. We just spoke about how ridiculously difficult it is to get a motorcycle license, unrestricted license. There's a few other things going on. The dangers to motorcyclists by automated vehicles and how they seem to be crashing into bikers alarmingly. So in all of those areas that is worthy of campaigning, how are you actually getting through to people? What channels do you use?
Well, we're looking at the manufacturers who are producing the automated cars, and we're very aware of incidents where motorcyclists have been injured and killed by automated vehicles, or drivers deciding that a vehicle that appears to drive itself may not be as advanced as they think, and so therefore by ignoring what the vehicle's doing, it's putting other road users at risk. And what we need is some sort of measure by which the artificial intelligence that's contained within the cars can be shown to recognize what a motorcycle is. And I think this is part of the problem, that a motorcycle is typically maybe 1/3 of the width of a car, and so it could be confused as other items. The car might think it's a lamppost, or it might think it's a barrier in the road or something instead of a motorcycle. And we're not convinced that the software that's being developed for these vehicles is being developed to a high enough standard that motorcycles can't be harmed. They seem at the moment to be able to navigate with cars and lorries and buses and other road traffic. But when a motorcycle is such a slim device as a form of transport, the problem is that it's just not recognizing what a motorcycle is. So we need to get the manufacturers to be held to account over this. And if there is a problem where someone gets injured, that particular company should be sued for the damages, because I can't see any other way of enforcing this other than to take it through the courts.
But they've allowed those prototype vehicles on the road.
Well, the governments have agreed to it, but again, I think it's one of these situations where the people who are agreeing to the tests and agreeing to having these cars on the road don't actually understand the complexity of it, and because of that, they're reassured by the manufacturers. But the reality is they need to be a lot harsher, and we need specialists to hold the manufacturers to account. And this is something that we need to remind politicians about, and we need to lobby for this. And it's part of our ongoing operation within the Motorcycle Action Group.
What important events or shows are you going to this year?
Yeah, the big picture is like this, and depending when viewers are watching it, some of this may already have happened. We're trying to reach out to what's now the Department for Energy Security and Net Zero, run by Grant Shapps, who used to be the Secretary of State for Transport. And we want to reason with him. We're not going to go there and have some emotional outburst. We'll show him the data and ask him to show us his data about why he thinks, for example, petrol engines and petrol cars being banned is going to be good for the environment. We don't even need to go into the philosophical or scientific debate about climate change. Even if you think that human beings are damaging climate change, we assert it's still a bad idea. So he's got an obligation as our employee, that's what politicians are, to justify that. So that's one example. With other politicians nationally, we do the same. Locally, we're going to local traffic network, low traffic zones, LTZs or LTNs, low traffic neighbourhoods, yeah, that's right. And I'm mixing up with ultra low emission zones, but I'm coming to that. Locally, we're talking about low traffic neighbourhoods and saying, do you actually even think the local people want them? A lot of the time, they're putting them in, ignoring the fact most people don't want them. That affects bikers. So bikers have to ride 15 minutes round what used to be like a 100-metre trip. So we're working with local communities and other interest groups to deal with that. Then the ultra-low emission zone. In London, they're trying to make it bigger and bigger. The mayor there, currently Sadiq Khan, thinks this is a virtuous thing to do, even though the data does not back this up. Lives are not being significantly saved by low traffic neighbourhoods and ultra-low emission zones. So we're teaming up with political groups, some partisan candidates and other movements to bring all of us together with one voice to say, let's stop this madness and have a common sense transport policy. A subset of that, of course, is motorbikes. That's what Motorcycle Action Group talks about. But as you and others have said, Motorcycle Action Group, I suppose, does punch above its weight, but that's because we're trying to bring everyone together to talk about this in a coherent way. I would rather not have to do this. I'd rather just ride bikes, and I'm sure Ian and yourself would rather do that. But someone's got to take a stand, because if we don't, we won't even have the right to buy the bikes we want to ride. And then looking longer term, this is going to be a big deal right up to the next general election. We're going to ask politicians, are you with us in defending our right to ride petrol and drive petrol and diesel cars or not? Because if you're not getting our vote. And that could actually be significant, especially if it's a tight election. this is going to be an election issue they can't ignore.
But I would stress that Motorcycle Action Group isn't on its own here. We have the support of many of the car driving groups as well. And I would like for the various clubs across the UK, the motorcycle clubs, to be aware of what's going on here. And we'll be writing to them, we'll be talking with them, and we'll be encouraging them to take part in Operation Earthquake, which is to find out what the views are for your local MP. If he doesn't agree that it's a wrong thing to do to ban internal combustion engines, then don't vote for him, and let him know that. And I think that we may see a turnaround. That's our hope. And if it's a marginal seat, we may just change the course of the legislation that's running out in front of us for 2030.
If they take our road space away, they lose their political road space. It's as simple as that. Looking ahead to where we campaign, as well as how we campaign, we go to the shows. We went to the London Motorcycle Show at the Excel Centre, very well represented there, very powerful voice, really the only campaigning voice for bikers there. We'll be going to the other shows, for example, Manchester's a big deal. There's often one down in Ilfracombe in southwest England, which is always well represented by MAG. And the big one is the National Exhibition Centre Motorcycle Live, where once again we're the last really serious campaigning motorcycle organisation standing. We offer the hand of friendship and campaigning to the Motorcycle Industry Association if they want to ride with us on this campaign. And more than anything, we are ready, willing and able to work with anyone, to hold a summit with everybody who shares what we say. They don't have to be of any political party. They don't have to be of any political transport persuasion, as long as they agree with us that it's time to get serious about the science, the politics, and the freedoms. And I would say, therefore, we are writing the script for ourselves, and so pleased to be working with PetrolRevolt. So pleased in advance to be working with anybody who feels motivated to actually be counted at last. And so it's going to be an exciting year.
So the other thing, of course, that Lembit didn't quite mention is that we do run our own events during the course of the year as well. And these are very, very well attended. They're some of the largest events in Europe for motorcyclists. I think that if anyone is interested in going to these events, simply look us up on www.motorcycleactiongroup.org, and you'll be able to see what events we're running for the summer.
Well, thank you very much for joining us, Ian and Lembit, and the campaigns that you fight on behalf of motorcyclists is very much appreciated, so thank you.
Well, thank you for having us today, and we'll be pleased to be working with PetrolRevolt later this year, and we hope into the future. And between us, we can bring pressure to bear on the politicians that are making our lives so uncomfortable, and we're going to get rid of this ban for internal combustion engines.
I hope you liked that insight into what's going on at Motorcycle Action Group. And I'd say if you were watching this channel and you were a committed car guy and not a motorcycle guy, it's worth heading over to Motorcycle Action Group's website and have a look at the very basic membership package. It's really cheap. I think, how much is it, guys? Is
£30 for a year, individual year membership, and
a bit more for
life.
For life.
And definitely, if you are a motorcyclist and for whatever reason Motorcycle Action Group has passed you by over previous years, then I'd urge you to go across to motorcycleactiongroup.org and sign up for whatever membership package you could do, because your money will be well spent campaigning the sorts of things that are really important to motorcyclists.